Hey there. As a fan of detective, historical, and fantasy novels, I couldn't resist reading this. That is, The Celebrated Cases of Judge Dee, translated from Chinese by Robert van Gulik. Now, the exact authorship of the original Chinese manuscript is a very contentious issue. The original manuscript might come from the 18th and 19th centuries, roughly the time of the Qing dynasty, which was the last imperial dynasty to rule in China. This particular novel, though, was translated by a Dutch diplomat, van Gulik. During the translation process, Gulik encountered 3 different drafts, and there were a lot of differences between them. However, there were also different parts of the book. The second part, Gulik didn't like. The first part, though, Gulik thought was written by a separate writer than the second part, and thought it was the more conventional, clever detective story, essentially. So he translated it, and this is what became The Celebrated Cases of Judge Dee. Now, the historical figure, Di Renji, is something of a folk hero that's been turned into a Sherlock Holmes-like character. The historical guy lived from roughly 630 to 700 AD and was a magistrate during the Tang Dynasty. Another interesting thing about that particular period, though, was that Di Renji served under Empress Wu, who essentially was the only female empress of China for about 4 millennia. If you played Civilization V, she's the leader of the Chinese faction. There are basically 3 mysteries in the first novel. The first is the murder of a traveling merchant. The second is a peculiar crime of passion, and the third is a rather bizarre poisoning case. One of the things I think van Gulik does really well is explaining exactly how the legal system of Imperial China worked. Judge Dee isn't just a magistrate. He's a judge, a jury, and he can order people tortured and executed. But there are some interesting constraints on his power. Making a bad call could be quite fatal for Judge Dee. For example, during this novel, he orders a body exhumed to examine it, and he almost loses his job for sacrilege. Likewise, if he orders an innocent person to death, that would likely involve his own execution as well. Van Gulik's translation also captures the responsibilities and the statuses of different classes and professions in Imperial China. For example, one of the first cases involved the perils that would come with being a traveling merchant in ancient China. You could get jumped by bandits, you could get ripped off by partners, and even worse things. And likewise, Judge Dee himself travels around with a retinue of servants and escorts, whereas sometimes he finds it a little more useful for his investigations to go incognito for undercover work. A quick thing worth mentioning, though, is that even though the book is set in the Tang Dynasty, which is about 1,000 years ago, there are a few minor anachronistic elements. But chances are, for your average reader, you're not going to be able to pick those up. All in all, I highly recommend this book. It's a great chance to see another culture's style of detective stories, one that goes back thousands of years. So, if you want to become a devotee, grab this book today. I hope to see you next time, here at the School of Night.